All right, here we go with Chapter 6, Part 3 of Lincoln. Lincoln left no doubt that he planned to use all his powers as president to enforce the law and reunite the states. He would insist that the mail continue to be delivered in the South. He would require that all federal forts and arsenals in Southern territory remain the property of the U.S. government, and he made it clear that it was up to the South to choose between conflict and peace. As he declared in words clearly directed at unhappy Southerners, "In your hands, my dissatisfied countrymen, and not mine, is the momentous issue of civil war. You have no oath registered in heaven to destroy the government, while I shall have the most solemn one to preserve, protect, and defend it." Lincoln had originally planned to end his speech with the harsh question, "Shall it be peace or a sword?" Instead, he decided to conclude with a more soothing message. He reminded Southerners that they were part of the same country, the product of the same history, as Northerners. North and South, he insisted, had far more in common than they had in dispute. As the thousands on hand listened intently, Lincoln spoke these final majestic words. "We are not enemies, but friends. We must not be enemies. Though passion may have strained, it must not break our bonds of affection. The mystic cords of memory, stretching from every battlefield and patriot grave to every living heart and hearthstone, all over this broad land, will yet swell the chorus of the Union, when again touched, as surely they will be, by the better angels of our nature." And then a frail, elderly man, clad in a long black robe, struggled to his feet, Bible in hand, and approached Abraham Lincoln on the Capitol porch. The Chief Justice of the United States was ready to swear Lincoln in as president, and this was no ordinary Chief Justice. It was none other than Roger B. Taney, author of the Dred Scott decision, which just 4 years earlier had declared that people of color had no rights. Now the Constitution required that he officially make a man who believed exactly the opposite the President of the United States. Some of the people on the scene remembered that Taney trembled nervously that day, obviously agitated. But the Chief Justice dutifully offered the Bible to his longtime political enemy, and Lincoln placed his massive left hand on the cover, raised his right hand, and swore to uphold the Constitution. All of Washington seemed to exhale. Lincoln was president without incident or harm. Not everyone cheered with the new chief executive's eagerly anticipated inaugural message. Upset by Lincoln's pledge to keep control of federal forts in the South, a Richmond newspaper predicted that civil war will be inaugurated forthwith. On the other hand, the abolitionist New York Independent hailed the speech as the wisest state paper issued to the American people since the Declaration of Independence. But not all anti-slavery men were pleased. An outraged Frederick Douglass seemed to hear only the unwelcome news that Lincoln planned to enforce the hated Fugitive Slave Act, and that he recognized Southerners' rights to continue owning slaves without interference from the government. Douglass denounced these pledges as signs of weakness and conciliation towards the tyrants and traitors. In a furious editorial for the newspaper, Douglass's Monthly, he compared the new president to a slave hound and rebuked him as the most dangerous advocate of slave hunting and slave catching in the land. Much as Lincoln hoped otherwise, the better angels of American nature would not prevail. That very afternoon of his inauguration, when Lincoln sat down for the first time at his new desk in the White House, he found an urgent message from the U.S. fort located at the mouth of the Charleston Harbor in hostile South Carolina. Federal soldiers still held the garrison, but its commander warned that they were fast running out of food and ammunition. If the new president did not quickly send supplies and weapons, the soldiers would have no choice but to abandon their post and allow Southerners to seize it. The place was called Fort Sumter. If Lincoln simply allowed the Federal soldiers to leave Charleston, the crisis might pass, or he might be seen as weak. On the other hand, if he sent supplies, his act could provoke a shooting war. It was in many ways the most important decision of his presidency: peace or a sword. Most of Lincoln's cabinet advisors cautioned him not to make a stand at Fort Sumter. It was too hard, they argued, to both rearm and defend, but the president proved unwilling to meekly give so valuable a property away to the Confederacy. He hit upon a clever plan. He would not send guns or bullets to Sumter, only food and medicine. He would resupply but not rearm it. And he would announce the plan in advance to the South, so the South could not regard the effort as an act of hostility by an enemy. Lincoln's solution was brilliant. If the Confederates allowed the supplies to reach the fort, Sumter would remain in U.S. hands. If they objected and attacked, then the Southerners would bear the responsibility for starting a civil war. As one writer later put it, Lincoln believed it was a case of heads he wins, tails they lose. In early April, the president duly announced that he intended to resupply Fort Sumter, and in response on April 12, 1861, Confederate cannon opened fire. For the next 34 hours, thousands of shells poured in on the tiny garrison. Several areas caught fire and smoke shrouded the installation. It was almost a miracle that no lives were lost. The only casualty was a horse. But Sumter's men had no way to withstand the battering, much less return fire to the shoreline. Finally, on April 13th, Federal forces surrendered. The next day, the last of the U.S. garrison left on a ship bound for the north. Lincoln immediately called for 75,000 volunteers to put down what he could only regard as an open rebellion, and he ordered a blockade of all Southern ports. For more than 10 years, Americans had feared that North and South would one day erupt in bloodshed. Now the time had come. The American Civil War, the bloodiest war in the country's history, was underway, and few at the time doubted why the fight began. Some people still insist to this day that the war was all about states' rights, but this is hardly true. The war was caused by secession, and secession was caused by slavery. One issue alone ignited the rebellion, the question of whether the nation could indeed endure half slave and half free. That's the end of chapter 6.